The palace that once shone like a beacon of pride now stood in silence. Its tall towers were cracked, its gardens empty, and its gates guarded by soldiers who were not loyal to the old royal family. The kingdom of the princess had fallen after a long war, and with it her freedom was taken away. The princess was kept in a high chamber made of stone. Chains were not always on her hands, but her every step was watched by guards. She was not treated with cruelty, but she was not free either. She was a prisoner who could look out at the stars but never touch them. Each morning she woke to the same heavy silence, and each night she dreamed of the world before the war. She remembered how her people once sang in the streets, how markets were filled with colors and voices, and how she walked without fear in the open courtyards. All of that was gone now. The empire that had conquered her land demanded tribute. They wanted resources, soldiers, and obedience. And as a sign of obedience, they kept her, the last daughter of the royal family, locked away as a living trophy. The princess often sat by the small window in her chamber. From there she could see the arena, a wide place where warriors fought for the amusement of the empire's nobles. She hated the sound of cheering crowds because every cheer was built on pain. The fights below were cruel reminders that her people no longer ruled themselves. Despite the silence around her, the princess was not without strength. She held her head high and refused to weep before her captors. She told herself that her suffering had meaning, that one day her people would rise again. Yet in the secret corners of her heart, she wondered if freedom would ever come. When the guards brought her food, she spoke little. They feared her name, but they did not fear her chains. She was a symbol more than a person, and that knowledge weighed on her spirit. Still, she dreamed. In the quiet hours of the night, when the empire slept, she dreamed of a day when someone would stand against the power that had crushed her world. Her people whispered among themselves that the princess was promised long ago to a noble, but no one had ever spoken that truth clearly. She knew of the promise in old records, yet it was distant to her. She was too young to remember, and no husband had ever appeared at her side. The empire used this forgotten promise to mock her, saying she was bound to a ghost. She ignored their words, but in her heart, she sometimes wondered if the promise was real. One day, as the sun fell behind the broken towers, the princess heard the sound of drums. The arena was alive again, and the people were gathering. She moved to her window, curious yet heavy with dread. Fighters were being brought forward, strong beings from many worlds. She had seen this many times, and every time it left her heart colder. But this time was different. Among the towering figures walked a man who looked unlike the others. He was not one of her kind, nor was he from any of the nearby worlds she knew. He was smaller in size, his frame lean but solid, his step steady as if he did not fear the crowd. His eyes carried a fire that no chains could break. The guards pushed him forward, but he did not stumble. He stood tall, even as laughter rose from the nobles who found his appearance amusing. The princess leaned closer to the window. Something about the man stirred a strange feeling in her chest. She had seen many fighters come and fall, but none carried themselves as he did. The air around him seemed alive with quiet defiance. The crowd expected him to bow, to show weakness, but he simply looked forward with calm strength. For the first time in many days, the princess felt her heart quicken. She could not explain it, but she felt as if she had seen him before in a dream. He was a stranger, yet there was something familiar, something she could not name. She pressed her hand against the cold stone wall, watching closely. The guards announced him as a fighter from a distant world, a human. Few in the empire knew much about his kind. They thought humans were weak compared to the giant warriors they owned, yet here was a human who carried himself with dignity. The nobles laughed louder, but the princess did not. She saw what they could not see. Night came quickly after the match began, and though the princess could not watch it all, she knew the human survived. The cheering told her so. When the guards returned him to the cells below, the crowd's voices still echoed in the air. The princess sat back in her chamber, her heart restless. She did not know why she cared so much about a single fighter, but she knew this human would not vanish from her thoughts. As the stars filled the sky, she whispered to herself that change might be closer than she believed. Perhaps her dreams of freedom were not just empty wishes. Perhaps someone had finally come who would break the silence of her prison. The princess lay down on her narrow bed, chains clinking softly, her mind alive with questions. Who was this human? Why did he feel so strangely familiar to her heart? She closed her eyes, and in her dreams that night, she saw the human again, standing tall against a tide of enemies, his hand reaching for hers. When she woke, her chamber was the same, but something in her spirit was not. For the first time in a long while, she felt hope flicker inside her. The human was a fighter in the arena, but to her he was more than that. He was a spark in the darkness, and she could not wait to see him again. The next morning in the palace was as heavy as ever. The guards marched with their usual rhythm, the nobles feasted without care, and the prisoners whispered in hidden corners. Yet for the princess, the world felt different. The memory of the human in the arena had stayed with her through the night. She could not erase the picture of his calm eyes and steady walk. He was unlike any other fighter she had seen. When the princess awoke, she moved quickly to the window of her chamber. She looked toward the cells beneath the arena. She could not see inside, but she knew he was there. The human had survived the previous night, and that fact alone set him apart. Fighters from across the galaxy often fell on their first day, but he had endured. By midday, the drums of the Empire echoed once again. The sound carried across the ruined courtyards and reached even the highest towers. Another day of combat was beginning. The princess pressed closer to her window. Her heart beat faster with each roll of the drums. She told herself it was only curiosity, but deep down she knew it was more than that. The gates of the arena opened wide, and the crowd roared with excitement. Nobles filled the highest seats, their robes glittering under the light. Ordinary people filled the lower rows, shouting and waving. Everyone had come to see warriors spill blood for entertainment. But when the human stepped into the arena again, silence cut through the noise for a brief moment. He stood in the center of the sandy floor, his chains removed but his arms bare. He had no heavy armor, only light straps to protect his chest. His weapon was a simple blade, smaller than the massive weapons his opponents carried. Yet the way he held it showed skill and confidence. He did not tremble, and he did not bow to the nobles who demanded respect. The princess leaned forward at her window. She studied him carefully. His face showed no fear. His eyes moved across the arena, not with panic, but with careful judgment. He was measuring the ground, the distance, and the enemies that were about to appear. She saw the mind of a fighter at work, not just the body. The gates on the far side opened, and two alien beasts were released. They were larger than the human, their skin armored, their teeth sharp. The crowd cheered at the sight, expecting an easy victory for the Empire's entertainment. The nobles laughed, saying the human would not last a minute. But the human did not run. He stood his ground, blade steady, feet firm in the sand. When the beasts charged, he moved with speed that surprised the crowd. He slipped aside, letting the first beast crash into the wall. The second lunged, but he rolled under its strike and cut across its leg. The crowd gasped. No one expected him to move like that. The princess watched with wide eyes. She had seen skilled warriors before, but this was different. The human fought with a mixture of intelligence and courage. He did not waste strength. Every move was planned, every step exact. The beasts were larger and stronger, but the human spirit refused to bend. The fight lasted longer than the nobles wished. Their cheers turned into shouts of impatience. But when the final beast fell to the sand, the arena shook with a different kind of noise. The common people shouted with real excitement, their voices rising above the nobles. They had seen something rare. They had seen a fighter win not with size, but with heart. The guards moved quickly to surround the human, pulling him away from the crowd's gaze. The nobles frowned, whispering among themselves. They did not like the way the people cheered for him. They did not want a human to become a symbol of strength. But it was too late. The image of the human standing tall above the fallen beasts was burned into the memory of all who had seen it. The princess stepped back from her window, her breath unsteady. She placed her hand over her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. She had watched many fights before, but none had shaken her spirit this way. The human was not like the others. He carried himself with honor, even in chains. He fought not only to live but as if every strike meant something greater. That night, the princess could not sleep. She paced the small length of her chamber, listening to the distant noise of the city. She thought about the human's movements, his calm face, his eyes that seemed to see more than the arena. She asked herself why she cared so deeply about a stranger. Was it because he was different from her captors, or was it something hidden inside her own heart? Down below in the cells, the human sat in silence. His wounds were light, and he tended them with care. Other prisoners whispered about him. Some were afraid, others hopeful. They spoke of how he stood without fear, how he fought with more than muscle. To them, he was a spark of defiance in a world that had crushed hope for too long. The guards mocked him, but he did not answer their taunts. He only closed his eyes and waited. In his mind, he carried a memory of a promise made long ago, a bond written in the stars. He had come for more than survival. He had come searching for someone, though he did not yet know how close that someone was. The princess lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her chamber. Her chains felt lighter that night, as if the sight of the human's fight had given her new strength. She whispered to herself that perhaps he was not just another fighter. Perhaps he had come for a reason. In the silence of the night, she closed her eyes and saw again the human's calm face, the way he stood against the beasts, and the fire in his eyes. For the first time in many seasons, she felt the faint light of hope. The morning sun broke over the ruins of the palace, spilling pale light across the broken towers and empty courtyards. The princess awoke early, her mind still restless from the previous day's events. She remembered the human warrior in the arena, standing tall against the beasts, unbroken and calm. She could not stop thinking about him. Something deep within her stirred at the memory of his courage. She dressed quickly and moved to the window of her chamber. Below, the arena was quiet, but she knew the day's fights would begin soon. The human was no longer a simple stranger. In her heart, she sensed that he was different, someone whose spirit could not be crushed by chains or by the cruelty of the empire. She pressed her hands to the cold stone of the window and waited, her eyes searching for any sign of him. The gates of the arena opened, and guards began to march fighters forward. The princess saw a mix of warriors, some towering and strong, others smaller and quick, each trained to fight with precision and power. The nobles cheered loudly, eager for the battles to begin. Yet the princess's eyes were fixed on one figure alone. When the human appeared, he moved with the same calm confidence she had seen before. His body was lean but strong, his movements deliberate, his gaze steady. He carried a simple sword and a small shield, no heavier than a child's toy compared to the massive weapons of the other fighters. But she remembered how he had overcome the beasts the previous day, how he had fought with more than strength. She understood that his courage came from something deeper. The first opponent stepped into the arena. A giant warrior from a nearby world, heavily armored and armed with a long spear, sneered at the human. The crowd roared, expecting an easy victory. Yet the human did not flinch. He stood in the center of the sand, his feet firmly planted, eyes never leaving the giant. The giant lunged with his spear, and the human stepped aside with perfect timing. He dodged again, and then again, moving in a rhythm that seemed impossible to follow. When he finally struck, it was precise and measured. The giant fell, not with a scream of defeat, but with surprise at the human's skill. The nobles murmured in disbelief, some angry that a human could survive, let alone triumph. The princess watched, her chest tight with emotion. She had seen warriors before, but none had moved with such purpose. This human was not reckless, and he did not fight for glory. He fought to protect, to endure, to survive. She felt a strange warmth inside her, a mixture of admiration and hope. Other fighters were brought forward, some large, some fast, each trying to take down the human. He faced them all without fear. He used strategy as much as strength, avoiding their attacks, using the arena itself to his advantage. A narrow bridge, a wall, even the sand beneath their feet became tools in his hands. Each move showed intelligence, courage, and an understanding of the world that seemed beyond his kind. The crowd began to notice. The cheering changed from the nobles' demands to genuine excitement from the ordinary people. They had seen many battles, but this human's courage was something rare. They whispered to each other, pointing at him and nodding in respect. Even the guards were taken aback. He was a fighter unlike any they had encountered. As the fights continued, the princess noticed something else. The human did not strike to kill or humiliate. He fought only to disarm or disable. If an opponent fell, he did not strike again. His eyes, calm and observant, seemed to hold a question for everyone around him: why must we fight like this? The princess realized that his courage was not just in facing danger, but in facing it without losing his honor. When the day's battles ended, the human remained standing while many others lay on the ground, exhausted or defeated. The nobles frowned, whispering about how unfair it was that a human had survived all the trials. But the common people cheered louder than ever. They saw him as more than a fighter. They saw hope, a reminder that strength was not only in size or power, but in courage, intelligence, and heart. The princess could not take her eyes off him. She had watched heroes in stories, but none had made her feel like this. She wondered how he could remain so calm when others were crushed by fear. She wondered why he fought for more than himself. Something inside her told her that he was not just fighting for survival, but for something greater, something he had not yet revealed. That night, she could not sleep. She paced her chamber, thinking of his movements, his calm eyes, and the way he stood against impossible odds. She imagined the world beyond her prison walls and wondered if he could survive there too. She whispered to herself, asking if courage alone could change the course of her people's fate. Meanwhile, in the quiet of the lower cells, the human rested but did not close his mind. He thought of the promise that guided him, the bond he sought, and the reason he had come to this world. He had faced death many times, yet each time he had risen. His strength came from hope, from the belief that he could make a difference. That hope burned inside him as brightly as any weapon. Other prisoners watched him with awe. They saw a man who refused to bow to fear, who used courage and intelligence instead of brute force. They spoke quietly among themselves, asking how one human could achieve so much. Some were inspired to stand taller, to resist the despair that had haunted them. In the silent shadows of the palace, he had become a symbol without even realizing it. The princess, in her chamber above, felt that same spark. She thought of the world beyond the palace walls, of her people suffering under the empire's rule. If the human could stand so firmly in the arena, perhaps he could stand with her outside the walls. Perhaps together they could face the empire and change their fate. For the first time in many seasons, she allowed herself a small smile. Courage, she realized, could ignite hope in ways no sword or army could. She whispered to the empty room that perhaps someone had finally come who could fight for more than themselves, someone who could fight for a future worth living. The human's courage was not only in surviving the arena. It was in standing for what was right, in protecting the weak, and in refusing to let fear rule him. The princess understood that she had seen more than skill in the arena. She had seen the first spark of something powerful enough to challenge an empire. And as the night grew darker, both the princess and the human rested with the same thought. They had faced the world alone, yet each sensed that their paths would soon cross in ways neither had expected. Courage had brought him to her attention, and perhaps soon it would bring them together for a battle larger than either had imagined. The palace slept under a blanket of quiet shadows. Only the occasional footsteps of guards echoed through the empty halls. The princess lay awake in her chamber, staring at the ceiling. Her mind wandered to the human warrior, the one who had stood fearless in the arena. She could not stop thinking about him. Something about his courage and calm presence pulled at her heart in ways she did not understand. The sound of a key turning in a distant door broke the silence. The princess stiffened. Guards rarely visited her at night. But then a familiar shadow appeared in the corridor. It was one of the palace servants, a kind old man who had served her family for years. He moved quietly, carrying a small lantern. "You must not be seen," he whispered. "But there is someone you should meet. He wishes to speak to you." The princess's heart raced. She nodded and followed the servant through the winding corridors, careful to avoid the guards' patrols. They descended into the lower levels of the palace, where the prisoners were kept. The air was cool and smelled faintly of stone and metal. Her chains clinked softly, reminding her that she was still a prisoner, but hope had begun to stir inside her. At last, they arrived at a small, dimly lit room. There, sitting on the edge of a cot, was the human warrior. His eyes lifted to meet hers, calm but alert. The faint glow of the lantern reflected in his face, highlighting the lines of strength and focus. The princess froze for a moment. She had never expected to see him so close, so real. "You survived again," she whispered. He nodded. "I always survive when there is a reason. And I think I have found one here." His voice was steady and kind, yet it carried a weight she could feel. The princess moved closer, her chains making a soft sound. "Why do you fight? Why do you risk your life for people who do not even know you?" The human looked down at his hands for a moment, then met her gaze. "I fight because I am searching. There is someone I promised to find." I do not yet know where they are, but I know they are here somewhere. Every step I take brings me closer to them." The princess's heart skipped. She did not understand why his words felt so familiar, as if he spoke of a bond she had forgotten. Who are you searching for?" she asked cautiously. He reached into a small pouch and took out a ring. It was simple, made of two metals joined together, forming a delicate circle. "This belonged to my wife," he said softly. "I was promised to her long ago. I carry it everywhere in hope of finding her again." The princess's breath caught. She stared at the ring. The design was the same as the crest of her family, a symbol she had seen only in old records. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for it. Could it be possible? Could the human before her be connected to her past in a way she had never imagined? The human watched her closely, his calm demeanor never faltering. "I have come to find her. She is the reason I survived the arena. She is the reason I endure the Empire's cruelty. I do not know where she waits, but I will not stop until I do." The princess felt a warmth in her chest she had never known. She had spent years as a prisoner, believing herself alone. Yet here was a man, a human, speaking with truth and purpose, a man whose courage and heart could not be broken. And now she began to suspect that the bond he spoke of was her own. You said your wife," she whispered. "Who is she?" He smiled faintly, the first true smile she had seen on him. "She is someone promised to me long ago. Her name is, she is the one I have always waited for. I do not yet know if she remembers, but I know she exists." The princess felt tears prick her eyes. Memories of stories her parents had told, of promises made between worlds, came rushing back. She remembered the ancient vow, the words that had been whispered when she was too young to understand. She had been promised to a human noble, someone from a distant land. At the time, it had been only words, distant and meaningless. But now, faced with the man before her, she realized the promise had been real. Her voice shook as she spoke. Could it be me?" The human's eyes softened. "I believe it is. I have carried the hope that she was still alive. And now, I see you. I see the one I promised to find." The princess felt a mixture of shock and joy. Everything she had believed about her life, her fate, and her family's history seemed to shift in that moment. The human was not just a stranger. He was the one she had been waiting for in ways she did not understand. They spoke long into the night, sharing stories in whispers. He told her of the distant world he came from, the journey that had brought him across the stars, and the promise that had guided him through danger and despair. She told him of her life in the palace, the fall of her kingdom, and the loneliness that had filled her days. As they talked, the walls of the prison room seemed to shrink. The darkness no longer felt heavy. In its place, a sense of connection grew, a quiet understanding that bridged two worlds. They were not only bound by fate, but now by choice. The human spoke of the challenges ahead. "The Empire will not let us go easily," he said. "They will try to separate us, to crush any hope of freedom. But we are stronger together. We must plan carefully and act wisely." The princess nodded. She had always dreamed of freedom, but now she understood that freedom alone was not enough. She needed courage, and she had found it in him. Together, they could face the Empire, and perhaps one day reclaim what had been lost. Before they parted for the night, he placed the ring gently in her hand. "This is proof of our bond," he said softly. "Keep it close, and remember that I will never give up. No matter what comes, I will find you again." The princess held the ring tightly. She had spent her life believing she was alone, but now she knew she was not. The human's courage had brought hope into her world, and in the quiet of the night, she allowed herself to believe in a future where they could be together. As she lay back on her bed, the first true peace she had felt in years settled over her. She knew challenges were ahead, but the knowledge that he existed, that he had come for her, gave her strength. For the first time, she slept not in fear, but with hope. The human sat in the shadows below, thinking of her, planning their next move. He knew the Empire would not allow them freedom easily, but he did not waver. Courage had carried him this far, and it would carry him further. Soon, their paths would align, and together they would face the trials that awaited. In the dark of the palace, a secret bond had been revealed. Two hearts from different worlds had found each other against all odds. The princess and the human now shared a knowledge that could change everything. The palace lay in quiet stillness, but the princess could no longer sleep. The revelation from the night before had changed everything she believed about her life. She clutched the small ring in her hand, feeling the weight of the promise it represented. Across the hall, the human warrior rested in a shadowed corner, eyes closed but alert. He had survived impossible trials, yet his thoughts never strayed from her safety. The morning light crept through the tall windows, and the princess rose from her bed. She paced the chamber, her mind racing with questions. How could this man, a human from a distant world, be connected to her? How could she have been promised to someone she had never met? And most importantly, what did it mean for her future? She decided she needed answers. Carefully, she retrieved old records hidden in a small chest beneath her bed. Dust filled the air as she opened them, revealing yellowed pages with faded ink. These were documents her parents had left, detailing the alliances and promises made between her kingdom and distant worlds. She read slowly, her eyes widening with each word. The records told a story long forgotten. To secure peace between her people and the humans, her parents had arranged a bond, a marriage promise to a noble human. At the time, she had been too young to remember, but the documents were clear. The promise had been real, signed and witnessed by leaders from both worlds. The human she had seen in the arena was not a stranger. He was the heir of the man to whom she had been promised. He was her husband by an ancient vow. The princess's hands shook as she closed the records. She could hardly believe it. The man had fought in the arena for reasons he had not fully revealed, and now she understood why his determination had seemed so familiar. It was more than courage. It was a bond, a connection written into their destinies long before either of them had been aware. She went to the corner of her chamber where he sat. "I have read the records," she said softly. "The promise is true. You are the one my parents spoke of. You are my husband by the vow of our worlds." The human's eyes opened, meeting hers with calm intensity. "I feared it might be true, but I needed to see you to be certain. The ring led me to you, but only your presence confirmed it. We are bound, not only by promise, but by the fate that has carried us to this moment." The princess felt a mixture of relief and awe. The chains that bound her body could not reach the bond that now existed between them. Her heart swelled with a strength she had not felt in years. She realized that hope had not been lost, it had only waited for the right moment to return. He stood and moved closer, careful not to startle her. "The Empire will not allow this easily," he said. "They will see us as a threat. They will try to keep us apart, to break the promise that was made before we were born. But we will not let them succeed." The princess nodded, understanding the danger they faced. "We must be careful," she said. But we are not alone. We have each other, and now we know the truth. That is stronger than any chain or guard. They spoke quietly, planning their next steps. The records had revealed more than the promise. They showed secret passages, hidden rooms, and weak points in the palace's defenses. The princess realized that her knowledge, combined with his courage, could allow them to act in ways the Empire did not expect. As they talked, the human shared details of his journey. He had crossed many worlds, faced countless dangers, and survived situations others could not. Each trial had strengthened him, not only in body but in mind. The princess listened, amazed at his endurance and determination. She saw that he was not only a fighter but a leader, someone capable of guiding them through the trials ahead. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the palace. Guards patrolled the corridors, unaware that a plan was quietly forming in the chambers above. The princess and the human worked together, combining knowledge and courage. Every whispered conversation, every careful observation, built a foundation for the freedom they would seek. The truth revealed more than their bond. It revealed the possibility of hope. The princess had lived in darkness, believing herself powerless. But the human's arrival, guided by a promise older than either of them, showed her that courage and love could challenge even the greatest empire. By midday, they had formed a plan to gather information, to understand the palace's weaknesses, and to find allies among the prisoners and servants. They spoke of the empire's strengths, the patterns of the guards, and the opportunities hidden in the routines of the palace. Each detail, no matter how small, became a part of their strategy. The princess felt a sense of purpose she had never known. The promise that had seemed distant and meaningless was now real. She and the human were connected by fate, and together they could change the course of their lives. The bond between them was no longer a secret or a hope, it was a living truth. As evening approached, the princess looked out at the horizon. The empire's towers glinted in the dying light, a reminder of the power that sought to control them. Yet for the first time, she did not feel fear. She felt strength. She felt courage. She felt a connection that would not be broken. The human stood beside her, silent but watchful. He did not need to speak. Their eyes met, and in that moment, they shared an understanding that went beyond words. The truth had been revealed, and with it, the path forward became clear. They were no longer alone. They were bound by promise, by fate, and by the courage that would guide them through the darkness. As night fell, they returned to the hidden room below the palace. The lantern's glow cast soft light across their faces, highlighting determination and trust. They were ready for what came next. The Empire had rules, guards, and weapons, but it did not have the bond that now connected them. Together, they would face whatever challenges awaited, and nothing could break the truth that had finally been revealed. In the quiet of the night, the princess held the ring once more. She whispered to herself that she had found not only a partner but a reason to hope. The human's courage, combined with their bond, could change the fate of their worlds. The truth had been revealed, and now they could move forward, together, into a future filled with possibility. The palace was quieter than usual that night. Guards moved along familiar paths, unaware of the plans forming in the hidden corners below. The princess and the human warrior had spent the day preparing. They had studied the palace's routines, memorized the positions of the guards, and traced secret passages from the old records. Every step had been carefully considered, every risk weighed. The princess held the small ring in her hand as they crouched in a narrow corridor. "Are you ready?" she whispered. The human nodded. "We have to move now." The patrols will change soon, and we cannot wait any longer. His eyes were steady, full of quiet determination. He adjusted the strap of his sword across his back and extended his hand. The princess took it, feeling the strength in his grip. Together, they slipped into the shadows. The corridors were dark and narrow, but the princess moved with confidence. She had grown familiar with every hidden passage and loose stone in the walls. The human followed, careful not to touch any loose tiles or metal grates that might alert the guards. They moved like shadows, silent and purposeful. As they reached the first hidden door, the human paused. "This leads to the lower levels," he said softly. "It is less guarded, but we must be careful. One mistake, and we will be caught." The princess nodded, and they pushed the door open. The passage smelled of stone and earth, and the air was cooler than in the palace above. Their footsteps echoed softly, but they moved quickly, knowing that every second counted. They descended stairs that spiraled downward, following the plans laid out in the old records. In the lower levels, they found prisoners huddled in small rooms. Many were too afraid to speak, but some whispered encouragement as the human passed. They recognized him as the fighter from the arena, the man who had refused to bow. His reputation had spread, even among the hidden corners of the palace. The princess saw the hope in their eyes and felt her own courage grow. They reached a chamber with a hidden exit, a small tunnel that led to the outer walls. The human checked carefully. "The guards change shifts in 5 minutes. We will have only one chance to slip past them." The princess took a deep breath. "I am ready. Let us go together." They entered the tunnel, crawling on hands and knees. The walls were tight, the air damp, but they pressed forward. Every sound seemed louder in the silence, every shadow a possible threat. Yet neither faltered. Their hands occasionally brushed, and the simple contact reminded them they were not alone. They were together, bound by truth and courage. At last, the tunnel opened to a small courtyard beyond the palace walls. Moonlight spilled over broken stones and tall grass. The night air was fresh and cool, a relief from the dampness of the hidden corridors. But the sounds of guards patrolling reminded them that freedom was not yet assured. The human scanned the courtyard. "We must move quickly," he said. "The guards are near, but there is a path through the trees. If we can reach the forest beyond, we will be safe for now." The princess followed closely, stepping lightly over rocks and broken tiles. The palace behind them loomed like a cage, but ahead lay hope. They ran together, moving with silent urgency, the grass brushing against their feet. They could hear the distant shouts of guards, and the echo of their own breathing seemed loud in the night. As they reached the edge of the courtyard, a small patrol appeared. The human moved without hesitation, stepping between the guards and the princess. He disarmed one quietly, then used the element of surprise to push the others back. The princess watched, amazed at his skill and calmness. Even in danger, he remained focused, protecting her without a thought for himself. Once the patrol was behind them, they slipped into the forest. Trees surrounded them, and the darkness became their ally. The sounds of the palace faded with every step, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the wind. The human led the way, careful to avoid paths the Empire might use to search for them. The princess followed, her heart racing but her spirit strong. After some distance, they stopped to catch their breath. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting silver patterns on the forest floor. The princess looked at the human, feeling a mixture of relief and admiration. "We made it," she said softly. He smiled faintly, wiping sweat from his brow. For now, he said. We are not yet free, but we are no longer prisoners. That is the first step. They rested briefly, listening to the night around them. The forest was quiet, but the princess knew the empire would soon send search parties. They had to plan their next move. Where will we go? She asked. The human looked toward the horizon. We need allies. People who can help us reclaim your kingdom, who can help protect those still trapped. There are worlds beyond this one, friends who will stand with us if we ask. But we must travel carefully. The empire's reach is long, and they will not stop until they have control. The princess nodded. She had lived her life in the palace, bound by rules and chains. Now she felt the freedom she had longed for, and it filled her with energy and hope. She knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time, she felt capable of facing it. As dawn approached, they continued their journey through the forest. The soft light of morning illuminated the path ahead, and the princess felt a sense of renewal. Each step took them farther from the palace and closer to a future they could shape together. The human walked beside her, steady and strong, his presence a constant source of courage. They paused at a small stream to drink and rest. The human looked at her with quiet intensity. We have taken the first step, he said. But this is only the beginning. The empire will not give up easily. We must be ready for everything that comes next. The princess nodded. She felt the weight of responsibility, but also the strength that came from knowing she was not alone. Together, they could face the empire, challenge its power, and protect the people who could not protect themselves. The bond between them was no longer a secret. It was their greatest weapon, stronger than any blade or shield. As they moved deeper into the forest, leaving the palace behind, the princess felt a sense of hope she had never known. The human's courage had brought them this far, and now it would guide them to the challenges ahead. They were no longer prisoners. They were partners, bound by truth, courage, and the promise of a future they could create together. The first light of day broke over the horizon, and with it came a sense of possibility. The palace was behind them, but the adventure was only beginning. They would face dangers, enemies, and trials, but they would do so together. And for the first time in her life, the princess believed that freedom, hope, and love were not just dreams, but realities she could fight for. The forest stretched endlessly before the princess and the human warrior, filled with towering trees and the soft sounds of birds awakening to the morning light. For the first time since the fall of her kingdom, the princess felt a sense of freedom. The palace, the chains, and the cruel empire were behind them. Yet she knew that the journey ahead would be even more challenging than the escape. They moved carefully along a narrow path, guided by the human's memory of the maps and stories he had learned in distant worlds. Each step brought them farther from the empire, but also closer to the unknown. The princess walked beside him, her hand occasionally brushing his. The touch reminded her that she was no longer alone and that together, they could face whatever came. As the sun rose higher, they found a small clearing near a stream. The human knelt beside the water, cupping it in his hands to drink. The princess followed, watching the calm strength in his movements. We have come far, she said quietly. But the empire will not forget us. They will search for days, maybe weeks, to find us. The human nodded, his eyes scanning the forest. I know. They will try to send soldiers, spies, and hunters. But we have something they do not understand. We have courage, strategy, and the bond that guides us. No force can break what is meant to be. The princess smiled softly. And what is meant to be is us, together. I understand it now. You were never a stranger. You were always meant to be by my side. The human offered her a faint smile. And I will remain by your side, no matter what happens. Together, we are stronger than any empire or army. Together, we can build a future that belongs to both our worlds. They rested by the stream for a while, drinking and gathering strength. The human shared stories of the distant planets he had visited, the people he had met, and the lessons he had learned. The princess listened with fascination. She realized that courage was not only about fighting, but also about understanding, planning, and guiding others. The forest began to thin as they moved forward, revealing a small village on the outskirts of the empire's territory. People moved through the streets, busy with their daily lives, yet the human and the princess could sense that fear and control lingered. The empire's influence was strong, and many had learned to obey without question. We need allies, the human said softly. The people here can help us. They have strength, but they need hope. We can give it to them. The princess nodded. Then we must show them courage, not only in battle but in action. They will follow us if they see the truth. Together, they approached the village carefully, speaking only when necessary. The human's presence inspired confidence in those they passed. People whispered about the fighter who had defeated impossible odds, and when the princess was seen beside him, her royal lineage gave weight to their words. Slowly, the villagers began to gather, listening as the human and the princess spoke of freedom, courage, and hope. By evening, a small group had joined them. They were ordinary people, farmers and craftsmen, but they carried determination in their eyes. The human trained them in basic defense and strategy, while the princess taught them about leadership and unity. Together, they formed a community, bound by the belief that change was possible. As days passed, the human and the princess became a symbol of hope. Stories of their courage spread through nearby towns and villages. People spoke of the human who refused to bow, of the princess who had reclaimed her spirit, and of the bond between them that no empire could break. Their courage inspired others to stand taller, to resist fear, and to work toward a better future. One evening, as the sun set over the distant hills, the princess and the human stood together on a small hill overlooking the village. The wind played through their hair, carrying the scent of the forest and the promise of new beginnings. She looked at him, her heart full of gratitude and hope. "We have come far," she said softly. "But the journey ahead is still long. There will be battles, challenges, and dangers we cannot yet see." The human took her hand in his eyes steady and full of confidence. "Then we face them together. Nothing can break the bond between us, and nothing can stop courage when it is joined with hope. We will reclaim what was lost and build a future that belongs to everyone who believes in freedom." The princess felt a surge of determination. For years, she had been a prisoner, feeling powerless against the empire's control. Now she understood that true power came from courage, knowledge, and unity. She had found strength in the human beside her, and together they would stand against any obstacle. The village grew under their guidance. People trained together, shared resources, and prepared for the challenges ahead. The human and the princess worked tirelessly, but they did so with purpose and hope. Every day, their bond grew stronger, and the people who followed them became more confident. One night, as they looked at the stars, the princess spoke softly. "Do you think we can truly change the empire?" The human smiled, his gaze steady on the horizon. "We can. It will not be easy, and it will take time. But courage, hope, and unity can overcome even the greatest power. We have started something that cannot be stopped." The princess felt peace settle over her. She no longer feared the future. The humans' courage and their bond had given her strength beyond measure. Together, they could face anything, and the promise that had guided them across worlds was now a living reality. As the first light of dawn touched the village, the human and the princess stood together, ready to lead. Their story was no longer just of survival, but of hope, courage, and the power of unity. They had escaped the empire, and now they would build a future that connected two worlds, showing that strength was not only in armies or weapons, but in courage, love, and determination. For the first time, the princess smiled freely. The human's hand in hers was warm and steady. Their journey had begun with chains and fear, but it would continue with freedom, hope, and the promise of a new world. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, inspire those around them, and prove that even in the darkest times, courage and unity could light the path to a brighter future. And so, under the rising sun, the princess and the human warrior looked toward a horizon full of possibilities. They were no longer prisoners, no longer separated by fear or doubt. They were partners, bound by destiny, courage, and a shared vision of a future where two worlds could stand together in strength and harmony. The empire would soon learn that the hearts of two determined souls could inspire more than armies ever could. And the princess and the human, united by bond and purpose, would lead the way to a new era where courage and hope would define the lives of all who believed in freedom.